500 cubits square, 25 steps ascending toward heaven, and a river that defies every known law of physics. This is the most meticulously detailed blueprint in history, yet it contains a fatal mathematical paradox. It is simply too massive for the earth. For 2,600 years, every architect has been left powerless because this temple cannot fit onto any existing mountain. Did God make a mistake? Or is he intentionally devoting 9 chapters of scripture to a useless structure? Tonight, we investigate the blueprint designed by heaven that the world is not yet large enough to contain. To find the meaning behind this blueprint, we must first descend into the deepest shadows of Israel's history. The date is April 19th, 573 BC. We know this with surgical precision because Ezekiel records it as the 25th year of his exile, and exactly 14 years after the fires in Jerusalem finally burned out. For 4 centuries, Solomon's temple had been the beating heart of the nation. It was the place where heaven met earth. Now it was a memory, a graveyard of scorched stone and forgotten glory. The Jewish people were scattered across the plains of Babylon, stripped of their land, their identity, and their hope. This was more than a national tragedy. It was a spiritual extinction. No temple meant no sacrifices meant no atonement. To the exiles, it felt as though the bridge to the divine had been permanently dismantled. They were living in a state of unmoored existence, a profound, hollowed-out feeling of being lost in a world that no longer made sense. Perhaps you recognize that feeling, that heavy, as suffocating silence when the structures you leaned on have collapsed, when the future looks like a gray, endless horizon, and you wonder if God has simply moved on. This was the collective psyche of a broken people. Into this darkness, God approaches a man uniquely qualified to feel the weight of the loss. Ezekiel was a priest by bloodline. He was a man trained to know every corner of the sanctuary, every ritual of the altar. But he had also seen the unthinkable. Years earlier, he had watched the Shekinah, the visible glory of God, rise from the temple and depart. He knew exactly what it looked like when the divine left the room. Now, standing in the ruins of his own life, Ezekiel is suddenly transported in a vision to a very high mountain in Israel. Here is the first clue that we are no longer dealing with earthly geography. Historical Jerusalem sits on a modest hill, but Ezekiel stands on a summit that defies the maps of his time. Stretching out below him is a complex so massive it looks like an entire city. And there, waiting at the gate, is a guide whose appearance is like burnished bronze. He holds a measuring rod, a precise 10.5-foot standard of heaven. The command given to Ezekiel is haunting. Son of man, look with your eyes, hear with your ears, and pay attention to everything I show you. Ezekiel is being told to count, to measure, to document. Because in a world that had become chaotic and meaningless, God was reintroducing order. The measurements were a symphony composed in the dark. Every cubit was a promise that the void was not permanent. Tonight, we aren't just looking at an ancient building, and we are investigating a God who measures out a future for people who thought they no longer had one. To understand the scale of what Ezekiel is seeing, we have to look at the instrument in the angel's hand. It isn't an ordinary measuring rod. It is a celestial standard, 6 long cubits. That is the length of the rod. In the ancient world, a standard cubit was roughly 18 inches. It was the length of a man's forearm. It was practical. It was human. It was the measurement Solomon used to build the first temple. But the angel's rod is different. Each cubit in this vision is a cubit and a handbreadth, 1 extra palm, about 3 more inches per unit. This is what scholars call the royal cubit, or the sacred cubit. By adding that single handbreadth, every dimension in Ezekiel's vision becomes 15% larger than anything built by human hands. It's the same numbers, but a vastly different building. Why does this matter? Because 15% is the difference between the possible and the impossible. When you apply a 15% increase to every length, every width, and every height, the total volume of the structure doesn't just grow, it explodes. The scale shifts from the relatable to the overwhelming. It is the first sign that this temple was never meant to be built by human contractors using human math. This isn't just an upgrade, it is a transformation of reality itself. This is the transition from human craftsmanship to heavenly standard. Think about the perimeter wall. The angel measures it first, 1 rod thick and 1 rod high. In our world, that's a wall over 10 feet thick and 10 feet tall. It is a radical separator. It marks a boundary so massive that it declares, even before you enter, that what is inside does not belong to the common world. By using a larger ruler, God is making a theological statement. He is saying that the world we live in, the one measured by our elbows and fingertips, is too small for what he is about to do. Solomon's temple was magnificent, but it was built within the limits of human capability. Ezekiel's temple is being measured by the king's standard. It reminds us that God doesn't just meet our expectations, he exceeds them by design. Every extra inch in that rod is a testimony to his character. He is consistent, he is precise, and he is always greater than the boxes we try to fit him in. We often try to measure God's promises using our own limited human cubits. We look at our resources, our strength, and our past, and we assume that's the limit of what can be built. But the angel is standing there with a royal cubit. He is telling us that the future God is planning is 15% larger, deeper, and more glorious than anything our current world can accommodate. But the ruler is just the beginning. The real shock comes when the angel leads Ezekiel toward the gates, and as we step through them, you'll realize that we aren't just looking at an entrance. We are looking at a structure that dwarfs everything you thought you knew about sacred space. Now we cross the final threshold. We enter the sanctuary building, moving toward the most holy place. This is the inner sanctum, the very heart of the complex where the presence of the divine is supposed to rest. And if you know anything about the history of the tabernacle or Solomon's temple, you know exactly what should be here. The Ark of the Covenant, and the golden chest, the mercy seat guarded by the wings of the cherubim. But as Ezekiel looks around, he encounters a disturbing silence. Not because of what is there, but because of what is missing. The most sacred objects in Israel's history are gone. Search the text from Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48. You will find no mention of the Ark of the Covenant, no golden lampstand, no table of showbread, no altar of incense as we once knew it. In Solomon's temple, these items define the space. They were the physical anchors of a nation's faith. Here they have simply vanished. Why would the most detailed temple blueprint in the Bible omit the very things that made the temple a temple? The answer lies in a profound shift in materials and meaning. This leads us to our first investigation, the silence of gold and the rise of wood. Hey, if you had walked into Solomon's temple, your eyes would have been blinded by gold. Every wall, every floor, every vessel was plated in the most precious metal on earth. Gold represents the blinding purity of a distant, untouchable God. It is a reflection of divine glory, but it is a cold, hard reflection. But in Ezekiel's vision, the interior is paneled with wood. The walls are covered in wood carvings of palm trees and two-faced cherubim. This is not a budget cut. This is a theological revolution. In the language of the Bible, gold represents divine majesty, but wood represents humanity and life. By replacing the golden walls with wood, the blueprint is telling us that the golden box era is over. We are moving from a God who is contained in a chest to a God who dwells among the living. And when the sun rises and the Shekinah, the visible glory, returns to this temple, it doesn't need gold to reflect its light. The glory itself is the light. In this new reality, symbols are no longer necessary because the reality has arrived. You don't need a lampstand when the light of the world is standing in the room. You don't need a mercy seat when the King of Mercy is sitting on his throne. The absence of the ark doesn't mean God is gone. It means he is so fully present that the furniture has become redundant. However, as we move back out into the inner court, we run into a second mystery, one that has caused more debate than perhaps any other part of this vision. The altar of burnt offering. It stands at the very center of the complex, and Ezekiel is given meticulous instructions on how to perform animal sacrifices. Blood, fire, smoke. And this brings us to a question that challenges everything we think we know about the future. If Jesus was the final, perfect sacrifice on the cross, why does this temple return to the slaughter of bulls and goats? Is the cross not enough? To solve this paradox, we have to change the way we look at time. Think about the sacrifices in the Old Testament. They were looking forward. They were bloody arrows pointing toward a future Messiah who would one day take away the sins of the world. They were payments made on credit. But the sacrifices in Ezekiel's temple are looking backward. They are not for the payment of sin. That debt was settled forever at Calvary. Instead, they are memorial offerings. They are a sacred liturgy of remembrance. Think of it like the bread and wine of the Lord's Supper, but on a massive national scale. In this future age, these rituals are a vivid, visceral reminder of the price that was paid to make this fellowship possible. They ensure that in a world of perfection, we never forget the cost of our redemption. This temple is a bridge between two worlds. It uses the wooden paneling of Eden and the sacrificial fire of history to create a space where the divine can live among the redeemed forever. It is a structure designed for a humanity that is fully alive, yet fully aware of its history. But as shocking as these missing treasures and returning sacrifices are, they are still just part of the internal logic. The true impossibility, the part that architects and geologists still cannot solve, lies outside the walls. Because for this blueprint to be built, the earth itself must be broken. Wait until you see what happens to the mountains of Israel when the glory of the Lord finally touches the ground. We are about to move from the mystery of the interior to the grand reveal of the landscape. And it begins with a river that should not exist. We are now crossing the final threshold. We are moving into the heart of the complex, the space designed for the very presence of the divine. But as we step into the most holy place, we encounter a silence that is more shocking than any measurement. If you know the history of the tabernacle or Solomon's temple, you know exactly what should be here. The Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest, the mercy seat where God once dwelt between the wings of the cherubim. But as Ezekiel looks around, he finds a disturbing void. The most sacred objects in Israel's history are simply gone. Search the final 9 chapters of Ezekiel. You will find no mention of the ark, no golden lampstand, no table of showbread. In Solomon's temple, these were the anchors of the faith. Here they have vanished. Why would the most detailed blueprint in the Bible omit the very things that made the temple a temple? This brings us to a mystery that redefines everything: the silence of gold and the rise of wood. If you had walked into Solomon's temple, your eyes would have been blinded. Every wall, every floor, every vessel was plated in pure gold. In the language of symbols, gold represents divine majesty, a glory so pure it is distant and untouchable. It is a reflection of light, but it is a cold, hard reflection. But Ezekiel's temple is different. The interior is paneled with wood. Oh no, the walls are covered in wood carvings of palm trees and two-faced cherubim. This isn't a budget cut, it's a theological revolution. While gold represents divine majesty, wood represents humanity and the power of resurrection. By replacing the golden walls with wood, the blueprint is telling us that the golden box era is over. We are moving from a God who is contained in a chest to a God who dwells among the living. When the Shekinah, the visible glory of God, returns to fill this temple, it doesn't need gold to reflect its light. The glory itself is the light. Symbols are no longer necessary because the reality has arrived. You don't need a lampstand when the light of the world is standing in the room. The absence of the ark doesn't mean God is gone. It means he is so fully present that the furniture has become redundant. However, this transition creates a new, even deeper conflict. As we move back into the inner court, we find the altar of burnt offering, and here the angel gives meticulous instructions for animal sacrifices: blood, fire, and smoke. This is where many readers stumble. If Jesus was the final perfect sacrifice on the cross, why does this temple return to the slaughter of bulls and goats? Is the salvation of the cross not enough? To solve this, we have to change the way we look at time. Think about the sacrifices in the Old Testament. They were looking forward. They were bloody arrows pointing toward a future Messiah who would one day settle the debt of sin. They were payments made on credit. But the sacrifices in Ezekiel's temple are looking backward. They have no power to atone for sin. That debt was settled forever at Calvary. Instead, they serve as a sacred liturgy of remembrance. Think of it like the bread and the wine of the Lord's Supper, but on a massive, visceral scale. In this future age, these rituals are a vivid reminder of the price that was paid to make this fellowship possible. They are a living picture designed to ensure that in a world of perfection, we never forget the cost of our redemption. It is a tribute to grace, not a return to law. This temple is a bridge. It uses the wooden paneling of Eden and the sacrificial fire of history to create a space where the divine can live among the redeemed forever. But as shocking as these internal mysteries are, they are still contained within the logic of a building. The true impossibility, the part that has left geologists and architects speechless for centuries, lies outside these walls. Because for this blueprint to be built, the earth itself must be broken. We are about to move from the mystery of the interior to the grand reveal of the landscape, and it begins with a river that violates every law of nature. We have explored the impossible dimensions inside the walls, but when we pull out the maps and try to place this temple on actual terrain, we run into a problem that no human architect can solve. The temple complex is massive, but the holy allotment surrounding it is even larger. 25,000 cubits by 25,000 cubits. That is approximately 70 square miles of consecrated ground. To give you some perspective, ancient Jerusalem covered about half a square mile. This blueprint is 140 times larger than the historical city. There is no mountain in Israel, no location in the entire region, that can accommodate 70 square miles of elevated sacred territory. For this blueprint to be built, the Judean hills would need to be completely flattened. The landscape would require a total transformation. And this is where geology begins to testify to the miracle. For centuries, skeptics called this a topographical error, but modern geologists have uncovered a detail that changes everything. There is a massive fault line running directly through the Mount of Olives, just east of the Temple Mount. The prophet Zechariah described this thousands of years ago. He wrote that on the day of the Lord, the Mount of Olives would split in two, moving north and south, creating a vast valley. He described the entire region being leveled into a plain, while Jerusalem is raised up. And this isn't just poetic imagery, it is a tectonic prophecy. The blueprint isn't flawed, the world just isn't ready for it yet. This structure is designed for a transformed earth, a flattened landscape where the mountains bow down to make room for the glory of God. But the impossible geography doesn't end with the land. It continues with the water. Ezekiel describes a small trickle of water flowing from beneath the threshold of the temple, past the south side of the altar. The angel measures it at intervals. At the first 1,000 cubits, the water is ankle deep. At the next, it is knee deep, then waist deep. By the fourth measurement, it is a river so deep and so wide it cannot be crossed. Here is the mystery. Ezekiel mentions no tributaries. No streams or pipes are feeding into this river. In our world, water doesn't just multiply as it flows, it requires a source. But this river grows from within itself. It violates every law of hydrology because its source isn't a mountain spring. It is the presence of the living God. And where does this impossible river go? It flows east into the Arabah, emptying into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the saltiest body of water on the planet. It is a place of absolute barrenness, incapable of supporting life. But when the water from the temple touches it, the Dead Sea is healed. Ezekiel sees fishermen lining shores that have never known fish. He sees trees of every kind bearing fruit every month because they are watered by the sanctuary. This is the grand reveal of the blueprint. The temple isn't just a building for people to visit. It is a source of healing for the entire planet. It represents a reality where the presence of God is so overwhelming that it overflows the walls, reshapes the mountains, and brings life to the most dead places on earth. The dimensions are impossible because they are designed for a world that has been remade. But this vision of a transformed landscape and a healing river leads us to one final question. If this temple is the center of a new world, who gets to live there? Wait until you see the design of the city itself, because the gates of this city reveal a secret about our future that no wall can contain. We have investigated the temple and the river, but what about the city where the people actually live? The blueprint concludes with a vision of a community that is as revolutionary as the architecture itself. Around the perimeter of this vast city are 12 gates, 3 to the north, 3 to the south, 3 to the east, and 3 to the west. Each one is named after one of the 12 tribes of Israel. At first glance, this seems like a return to old national boundaries. But if you look deeper, you find a detail that would have been unthinkable in the ancient world. In Ezekiel chapter 47, God gives a startling command. He tells the people to divide the land as an inheritance not only for the tribes, but also for the foreigners residing among them. He says, "They shall be to you as native-born children." This is a blueprint for a new humanity. Ezekiel is describing a society where identity is no longer defined by bloodlines, status, or borders. It is a world where the outsider is given the same rights as the insider. These 12 gates represent a vision of unlimited access. When in our current world we build walls to keep people out, but God is designing a city where the doors are always open. Centuries later, the book of Revelation picks up this same vision. It describes a city where the gates never close by day and there is no night. The city of the future has no aliens. It has no strangers. Every gate represents a path home for anyone who seeks the divine. It is a sanctuary for a humanity that is finally unified, not by politics, but by the presence of the King. And finally, we reach the very last verse of Ezekiel. After 9 chapters of cubits, thresholds, and rods, the blueprint gives us a name. The name of the city from that day shall be Yahweh Shammah. The Lord is there. That is the point of every measurement. The reason for the massive gates, the reason for the impossible river. And the Lord is there. It was never about the stones. It was always about the resident. The city exists for one purpose, to be the place where God and man finally dwell together, without distance and without end. 70 square miles of holy ground, a river that heals the dead, gates larger than palaces. After investigating every cubit of this blueprint, we are left with one final question. What does this impossible architecture have to do with your life? The answer is found in the measurement itself. Remember the royal cubit. It is 15% larger than anything human. This is a message for you. It means that the plans God has measured out for your life are always 15% or infinitely larger than the version you have imagined for yourself. You are the 500 cubits of God. You might feel like Ezekiel standing in the ruins of Babylon, scattered, exhausted, or lost in the dark. But look at the blueprint again. God spent 9 chapters meticulously measuring every threshold and every chamber of a place where he intended to stay forever. If he is this precise with stone and wood, how much more is he with your soul? Every pain you have carried and every dream you have nurtured has been measured by a heavenly standard. The Ark of the Covenant is missing from this temple because a symbol is no longer needed when the reality is present. The ultimate temple God wants to fill isn't made of brick and mortar. It is you, your life, your heart. Yahweh Shammah. The Lord is there. The blueprint is ready. The topography of the world is being reshaped. If the only question remains, will you prepare room for his presence to dwell in you? If this investigation opened your eyes to a new depth in the Word, hit that like button and subscribe. If the ark is gone because God's presence is now direct, what does that tell you about your own access to him today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep seeking, keep studying, and remember the Lord is there.